Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun!
Atlas stirred, his eyelids fluttering as consciousness slowly crept in. Something felt off, but in the hazy realm between sleep and wakefulness, he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Stretching languidly, Atlas froze mid-motion. His body felt different, lighter in some places, heavier in others. Heart racing, he bolted upright, the blanket falling away to reveal an unfamiliar silhouette. "What the hell?" The words came out higher-pitched than usual, almost squeaky with panic. Atlas scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over his own feet as he rushed to the full-length mirror in the corner of the room. The reflection that greeted him was not his own, at least, not the one he was accustomed to seeing. Staring back was a young woman with tousled chestnut hair falling past her shoulders, wide hazel eyes, and a delicate jawline. Atlas raised a trembling hand to her face, watching in disbelief as the reflection mimicked the action. "This can't be happening," Atlas whispered, voice quavering. "It's gotta be a dream. Yeah, that's it. Just a really vivid, weird dream." Pinching himself hard on the arm, Atlas winced at the sharp pain. Not a dream, then. The reality of the situation began to sink in, bringing with it a tidal wave of panic. Okay, think," Atlas muttered, pacing back and forth. "What happened last night?" Fragments of memory came floating back. The nervous anticipation about proposing to Cora, the chance discovery of that strange necklace in the antique shop, the fervent wish for a sign of confidence. Atlas's gaze snapped to the nightstand, where the necklace lay innocently glinting in the morning light. "No way," he breathed, approaching it cautiously. "It couldn't have. Could it?" Picking up the necklace, Atlas examined it closely. It seemed ordinary enough, a simple silver chain with a small, intricately carved pendant. But as he held it, he could have sworn he felt a faint vibration, a hint of dormant power. "This is insane," Atlas said, shaking his head. "Magical necklaces don't exist. People don't just change gender overnight. There's gotta be a logical explanation for this." But try as he might, Atlas couldn't come up with anything remotely logical to explain his current predicament. The evidence was right there in the mirror. Somehow, some way, he had become a woman. A sudden thought struck him, sending a fresh wave of panic through his system. "Cora!" he gasped. "Oh God! What am I going to tell Cora?" The idea of facing his girlfriend in this state was terrifying. How could he possibly explain something he didn't understand himself? And the proposal, the whole reason for his anxiety in the first place, now seemed like a distant, impossible dream. Atlas sank onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands. "What am I going to do?" he moaned. The buzz of his phone startled him out of his spiral of despair. Glancing at the screen, Atlas saw a text from Cora. "Morning, babe. Don't forget we're meeting Jen and Mike for brunch at 11. Can't wait to see you." Atlas's stomach dropped. Brunch. In public. With friends. The very thought made him want to crawl under the covers and never come out. "I can't do this," he muttered, fingers hovering over the phone screen. But as he considered canceling, another thought occurred to him. Maybe this was an opportunity, a chance to figure out what was going on without arousing suspicion. After all, if he suddenly went off the grid, Cora would definitely know something was wrong. Taking a deep breath, Atlas typed out a reply. "Looking forward to it. See you soon." His finger hovered over the send button for a long moment before he finally pressed it, sealing his fate.
Okay,
Atlas said, standing up and squaring his shoulders.
I can do this. It's just brunch. How hard can it be?
As it turned out, getting ready for brunch as a woman was significantly more complicated than Atlas had anticipated. He stood in front of his closet, utterly bewildered by the array of clothing that suddenly seemed foreign and intimidating.
Since when do I own so many frilly things?
Atlas muttered, pushing aside blouses and dresses in search of something, anything, that felt familiar. Finally, he settled on a pair of jeans and a simple t-shirt. It wasn't until he tried to put them on that he realized the next challenge. His body proportions were completely different now. The jeans that usually fit perfectly now gaped at the waist and strained across the hips. The t-shirt, once comfortably loose, now clung in ways that made Atlas acutely uncomfortable.
This is a disaster,
Atlas groaned, flopping back onto the bed. His gaze fell on the dresser, and he realized with a start that he'd have to deal with undergarments. The very thought made him break out in a cold sweat. After several awkward attempts and a fair bit of cursing, Atlas managed to get dressed in a way that felt somewhat presentable. He tugged at the hem of the shirt, trying to make it sit right, but eventually gave up with a sigh of frustration.
Okay, clothes sorted,
he muttered, glancing at the clock. Now what? His eyes fell on the makeup bag sitting on the dresser. Cora must have left it there the last time she stayed over. Atlas approached it warily, as if it might bite him.
Do I really need to bother with this?
He wondered aloud. But then he remembered how Cora always did her makeup, even for casual outings like brunch. If he showed up bare-faced, it might raise questions he wasn't prepared to answer. With shaking hands, Atlas unzipped the bag and peered inside. The array of tubes, compacts, and brushes might as well have been alien technology for all he understood of them.
YouTube tutorials it is,
Atlas sighed, reaching for his phone. An hour and several tissue-smeared attempts later, Atlas stared at his reflection in dismay. His eyes were smudged with uneven eyeliner. His cheeks looked like they'd been attacked by an overzealous child with finger paints. And his lips. Well, the less said about that, the better. How do women do this every day? Atlas wondered, grabbing another tissue to try and salvage the situation. Just then, his phone buzzed again. Another text from Cora. On my way to pick you up! Be there in 15! Panic surged through Atlas. 15 minutes? He glanced at his reflection again and felt a wave of despair. There was no way he could fix this in time. In a frenzy, Atlas scrubbed at his face with makeup remover, managing to get most of the disaster off. With only minutes to spare, he settled for a swipe of mascara and a dab of tinted lip balm, the only two items he felt marginally confident in applying. The sound of a car horn outside made Atlas jump. Coming! He called out, wincing at the unfamiliar pitch of his voice. Grabbing his keys and wallet, Atlas paused at the door, taking a deep breath to steel himself.
You can do this, he murmured. It's just brunch. Just act normal.
As he stepped outside, squinting in the bright sunlight, Atlas realized he had no idea what normal looked like anymore. The weight of his new body felt alien, his center of gravity all wrong. He tottered uncertainly down the path, hyper-aware of every movement. Cora waved from the driver's seat of her compact car, a bright smile on her face. "Hey, babe, you look great." Atlas forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as strained as it felt.
"Thanks,"
he managed, his voice coming out as a near whisper. Clearing his throat, he tried again.
"You too."
As he slid into the passenger seat, Atlas was acutely aware of how different everything felt. The seatbelt cut across his chest in an unfamiliar way, and he had to resist the urge to constantly adjust his clothing. Cora leaned over for a quick kiss, and Atlas panicked for a moment before awkwardly returning the gesture. If Cora noticed anything amiss, she didn't show it. "So, are you excited for brunch?" Cora asked as she pulled away from the curb. "I heard this place has amazing avocado toast." Atlas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His mind was racing, trying to figure out how to navigate this situation. How was he supposed to act? What if he said something that gave him away? "You're quiet this morning," Cora observed, glancing at him with a hint of concern.
"Everything okay?" "Yeah, just didn't sleep great,"
Atlas mumbled, which wasn't entirely a lie. He'd been tossing and turning all night, anxious about the proposal he'd been planning. Cora reached over and gave his hand a squeeze. "Aw, poor baby. Well, nothing a good cup of coffee can't fix, right?" Atlas managed a weak smile, grateful for Cora's easygoing nature. As they drove through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, he tried to relax, to settle into this new reality. But every glance in the side mirror, every shift in his seat, was a stark reminder of how drastically things had changed. The brunch spot was a trendy little cafe in the heart of downtown, all exposed brick and hanging plants. As they walked in, Atlas felt like every eye was on him, scrutinizing his appearance, his walk, his very being. He resisted the urge to hunch his shoulders, trying to project a confidence he definitely didn't feel. "There they are!" Cora waved, spotting their friends at a table near the back. Jen and Mike stood up to greet them, and Atlas found himself enveloped in hugs that felt simultaneously familiar and strange. He tensed at the contact, unused to the way his new body responded to the embraces. "Girl, your hair looks amazing!" Jen gushed, running her fingers through Atlas's locks. "What products are you using?" Atlas blinked, caught off guard.
Just the usual?"
he ventured, having no idea what his usual hair care routine might entail in this form. Jen laughed, taking it as a joke. "Always so modest."
"Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up."
They settled into their seats, and Atlas found himself wedged between Cora and Jen, feeling more out of place than ever. The menu in front of him might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the attention he could give it.
"So, what's everyone getting?"
Mike asked, peering over his menu.
"I'm thinking about the chicken and waffles."
"Ooh, that sounds good." Cora mused. "But I think I'll stick with the avocado toast. Atlas, honey, what about you?" All eyes turned to Atlas, who felt a bead of sweat form on his brow.
I'll have the same as Cora,"
he said quickly, latching on to the familiar option. "Avocado Toast Fan Club!" Jen cheered, holding up her hand for a high five. Atlas hesitated for a split second before awkwardly returning the gesture, his palm connecting with Jen's with a weak slap. He could feel Cora's curious gaze on him and forced a smile, hoping it looked more natural than it felt. As their orders were taken and mimosas were brought to the table, Atlas found himself struggling to keep up with the conversation. Topics he might have easily contributed to before now felt like minefields of potential slip-ups. "Oh, Did you hear about Sarah's engagement? Jen asked excitedly. The ring is gorgeous! Makes me wonder when some other people might be popping the question. She wiggled her eyebrows meaningfully at Atlas and Cora. Atlas nearly choked on his mimosa, coughing and spluttering as Cora patted him on the back. Easy there, Tiger, Cora laughed. No need to get so excited about other people's engagements. If only she knew, Atlas thought ruefully, remembering the ring box hidden in his sock drawer at home. The proposal he'd been so nervous about now seemed like a problem from another lifetime. Speaking of exciting news, Mike chimed in. Jen and I have been talking about taking a couples trip this summer. You two in? Atlas opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, realizing he had no idea what their summer plans might be. He looked to Cora, hoping she'd take the lead. Cora, however, seemed to be waiting for Atlas to answer. What do you think, babe? She asked. We were talking about wanting to go to the beach, remember? Right, the beach, Atlas said weakly. That sounds great. Awesome! Jen clapped her hands together. We could rent a beach house, spend our days lounging in the sun, our nights having bonfires. Oh, and we absolutely have to go shopping for new swimsuits before we go. The thought of swimsuit shopping sent a fresh wave of panic through Atlas. He'd barely managed to dress himself this morning. The idea of trying on bathing suits was downright terrifying. Yeah, totally, he managed, his voice strained. Can't wait. Their food arrived, providing a welcome distraction. Atlas stared down at his avocado toast, realizing too late that he'd never actually eaten it before. He watched surreptitiously as Cora picked up her toast, taking delicate bites, and tried to mimic her actions. So, Atlas, Mike said between bites of his chicken and waffles. How's work going? Any interesting cases lately? Atlas froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Work. He hadn't even thought about work. What was he going to do when Monday rolled around? How could he possibly show up at the law firm looking like this? It's going, he said vaguely, buying time as he tried to remember any recent cases he could talk about without raising suspicion. Just wrapped up that copyright infringement case. You know, the usual stuff. Mike nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. Man, I don't know how you do it. All that legal jargon would drive me crazy. Atlas let out a weak chuckle, relief washing over him as the conversation moved on to safer topics. He picked at his food, stomach churning with anxiety, barely tasting the expensive avocado toast. As the meal progressed, Atlas found himself retreating further into silence, overwhelmed by the constant need to monitor his every word and action. He caught Cora giving him concerned looks, but couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes, afraid of what she might see there. Are you sure you're okay? Cora whispered, as Jen and Mike bickered good-naturedly over the last bite of their shared dessert. You seem off today. Atlas forced a smile, hating the worry he saw in Cora's eyes. I'm fine, really. Just tired, like I said. And, thinking about work stuff. Cora didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded, giving his hand a squeeze under the table. Okay. But you can talk to me about anything, right? The sincerity in her voice made Atlas's heart ache. How could he possibly explain this situation to her? Would she even believe him if he tried? I know, he said softly. Thanks. As they said their goodbyes outside the cafe, Atlas found himself once again navigating the unfamiliar terrain of hugs and cheek kisses. He felt clumsy and out of sync, his movements stilted and awkward. "We should do this again soon," Jen said, pulling Atlas into one last hug. "And don't forget about swimsuit shopping." Atlas nodded mutely, managing a weak smile as they parted ways. As he slid back into Cora's car, he felt a mix of relief and dread. He'd made it through brunch without completely giving himself away, but the day was far from over. "Home?" Cora asked as she started the engine. Atlas nodded, leaning his head against the window. "Home," he echoed, wondering if anything would ever feel like home again in this strange new reality. As they drove, Atlas's mind raced with the challenges that lay ahead. Work, social obligations, daily routines. Everything would need to be navigated anew. And looming over it all was the question of how long this would last. Was this change permanent? And if it was, how could he possibly build a life around it? The weight of these thoughts pressed down on Atlas, making him feel small and lost in a world that had suddenly become vast and unfamiliar. As Cora's car wound through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, Atlas closed his eyes, wishing desperately for a way back to normalcy. But as they pulled into the driveway of his apartment building, Atlas knew that normalcy was a luxury he could no longer afford. Whatever came next, he would have to face it in this new form, navigating the complexities of a life he'd never imagined living. "Want me to come up?" Cora asked as she put the car in park. Atlas hesitated. Part of him craved the comfort of Cora's presence, the familiarity of their routine, but a larger part was terrified of being alone with her, of the intimacy they usually shared, and how different it would be now. I think I'm just going to take a nap," Atlas said, hating the lie, but seeing no alternative. "Hopefully shake off this weird mood." Cora nodded, understanding as always. "Okay, babe. Get some rest. Call me later if you want to talk, all right?" Atlas managed a smile, leaning over to give Cora a quick peck on the cheek. "I will. Thanks for understanding." As he climbed out of the car, Atlas felt Cora's eyes on him, concern evident in her gaze. He waved as she drove away, maintaining the facade until she was out of sight. Only then did he let his shoulders slump, the weight of his situation crashing down on him once more. Inside his apartment, Atlas leaned against the closed door, eyes closed, trying to steady his breathing. The events of the morning felt surreal, like a dream he couldn't wake up from. But the unfamiliar weight on his chest, the strands of long hair tickling his neck, these were constant reminders of his new reality. Pushing off from the door, Atlas made his way to the bedroom, his gaze immediately drawn to the necklace still lying on the nightstand. He approached it cautiously, as if it might transform him again with a mere touch.
"Okay,"
he said, voice shaky but determined.
"You got me into this mess. Now, how about getting me out of it?"
Picking up the necklace, Atlas examined it closely, looking for any sign of its magical properties. But it remained stubbornly ordinary, a simple piece of jewelry with no obvious powers.
"Come on,"
Atlas muttered, frustrated.
"There's got to be some kind of, I don't know, magic words or something."
He tried various phrases. "I wish to be a man again. Change me back." Even a desperate abracadabra. But nothing happened. The necklace remained inert, and Atlas remained very much female. Collapsing onto the bed, Atlas buried his face in his hands. What am I going to do? He groaned. The silence of the apartment offered no answers. Atlas lay there for a long moment, mind racing with possibilities, each more far-fetched than the last. Should he try to find the antique shop where he'd bought the necklace? But would they even believe him if he explained what had happened? A sudden thought struck him, and Atlas sat up abruptly.
The internet,
He said aloud.
There's got to be something online about this kind of thing, right?
Grabbing his laptop, Atlas began a frantic search, typing in phrases like sudden gender change, magical transformation, and woke up as a woman. Most of the results were fiction stories or New Age spirituality sites, nothing that seemed applicable to his very real, very physical transformation. Hours passed as Atlas fell down various internet rabbit holes, each search leading to more questions than answers. Forum posts about past life regressions, articles on gender identity and dysphoria, even conspiracy theories about government experiments. None of it helped explain his situation or how to reverse it. As the afternoon light began to fade, Atlas finally closed his laptop, eyes strained and head aching. He was no closer to a solution than he had been that morning. The growling of his stomach reminded Atlas that he'd barely touched his brunch. Sighing, he made his way to the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge for something simple to eat. As he put together a sandwich, he couldn't help but notice how different even this mundane task felt. Reaching for things on higher shelves was more of a stretch, and his smaller hands made some movements feel clumsy and unfamiliar. Eating mechanically, Atlas's mind wandered to the immediate future. Tomorrow was Monday. He had work, meetings with clients, a whole day of pretending to be someone he wasn't. The thought made his stomach churn. "I can't do it," he muttered, pushing away his half-eaten sandwich. "There's no way I can pull this off." But what choice did he have? He couldn't just disappear, couldn't explain to his boss or his clients that he'd magically transformed into a woman overnight. And Cora, the thought of facing Cora again, of trying to maintain their relationship in this state, was almost too much to bear. Atlas's gaze fell on his phone, sitting silent on the kitchen counter. He knew he should call Cora, should try to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the thought of hearing her voice, of having to pretend everything was fine, made his chest tighten with anxiety. Instead, he found himself opening his email, fingers moving almost of their own accord as he typed out a message to his boss. "Dear Mr. Harrison, I'm not feeling well and think I'm coming down with something. I'll need to take a sick day tomorrow. I'll keep you updated on my condition. Best regards, Atlas." Hitting send before he could second-guess himself, Atlas let out a shaky breath. It wasn't a solution, not by a long shot, but it bought him a day to figure out what to do, how to navigate this impossible situation. As night fell, Atlas found himself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, really looking at his new reflection for the first time. The face staring back at him was undeniably feminine. Softer jaw, fuller lips, long lashes framing those familiar hazel eyes. It was as if someone had taken his features and subtly reshaped them, creating a version of himself that was both familiar and utterly foreign. Hesitantly, Atlas reached up to touch his face, watching as delicate fingers traced the new contours of his cheekbones, his nose, his chin. It was surreal, seeing those unfamiliar hands move in sync with his own actions. "This is me now," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "At least, for now." The reality of his situation settled over him like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just a bizarre dream or a temporary glitch. This was his life now, for better or for worse, and somehow he was going to have to find a way to live it. Turning away from the mirror, Atlas began his nightly routine, each familiar action now tinged with the strangeness of his new form. Brushing his teeth felt odd with smaller hands and a different jaw shape. Washing his face required navigating around longer hair that kept falling forward. As he changed into pajamas, Atlas couldn't help but notice the differences in his body, the curve of his hips, the swell of his chest, the overall softness that had replaced his former muscular build. It was disorienting, seeing and feeling these changes, knowing that, beneath it all, he was still himself. Wasn't he? Crawling into bed, Atlas hugged a pillow to his chest, feeling small and vulnerable in a way he never had before. The events of the day replayed in his mind. The awkwardness of brunch, the fruitless internet searches, the looming uncertainty of what came next. As exhaustion finally overtook him, Atlas's last coherent thought was a desperate hope that he might wake up tomorrow and find this had all been some elaborate, vivid dream. But deep down, he knew nothing would ever be the same again.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!